President Biden is set to unveil an ambitious $2 trillion infrastructure bill today. The White House says that the administration's American Jobs Plan will address climate change and the U.S.'s growing economic competition with China. Almost a third of the money will go to repairing America's roads, bridges, and airports and installing 500,000 electric car charging stations across the country. Covering this for us now is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. He is at the White House. So, Ed, President Biden says he'll raise corporate tax rates from 21% to 28%. In so doing, he effectively reverses former President Trump's 2017 tax cuts. That has landed him in trouble, of course, with his own party, in fact, especially lawmakers on the East Coast and in California. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting wrinkle here. For years here in Washington, they've talked about passing something that would address all the nation's various infrastructure needs, rebuilding roads and bridges, airports, train stations, removing lead pipes from schools and whatnot. But they can never figure out exactly how they would pay for this. The president proposing here that this portion of his next set of ideas regarding how to rebuild the economy should be paid for with this corporate tax rate increase. White House points out it would remain lower than where it was before the 2017 tax changes put in by the Trump administration. But as you point out, a few Democrats concerned about this because they represent highly taxed parts of New York, New Jersey, California. Remember, there was that talk about the state and local tax deduction that people get to take in their federal taxes that was removed. It hit a lot of people who own property in the Northeast and out in California harder. These Democrats saying they don't want to talk about any other kind of tax increase until you take away the tax increase that is affecting their constituents. The White House, non-committal so far. They'll talk to those Democrats about it. But they have leverage because, remember, things in the House are quite narrowly divided right now. Democrats only having a handful more seats than Republicans, and they can't afford to lose really more than 1 or 2 votes on most big legislation. So that is one of the more complex and politically fraught parts of this that is going to have to be discussed now over the next several months. Remember, we spent a lot of time talking about when is the American Recovery Plan going to get passed, how quickly will those $1,400 checks get out. The goal was to get it done in 6 weeks. On this one, expect something to be done probably by Labor Day. That is how long we're talking here. And when we're talking about $2 trillion to $4 trillion, might not hurt to have Washington spend a few months talking about how exactly we'd spend that.
Yeah, although, Ed, as you point out, we're talking $2 to $4 trillion. Let's remember the COVID relief bill was $1.9 trillion. So we'll talk about how some members of his own party, the president's party, are reacting. Some are even saying it might not be enough. But let me ask you about what the president is doing in Pittsburgh this afternoon. It's the first of a 2-part infrastructure plan. So explain why it's divided into 2, especially since we know it's going to take a long time to get done.
Yeah, there's a few ways to look at this. What's being introduced today is sort of the nuts and bolts infrastructure. All of the physical construction and redevelopment or revamping projects that are out there that the government believes, that the White House believes would help boost the economy and really help update the country, bring it into the 21st century in many ways. Things like renovating VA hospitals across the country, thousands of bridges, 20,000 miles of highways and streets across the country. Big concern about the fact that there are still lead pipes going into a lot of public institutions, schools and universities across the country. They'd remove those and replace them. Anne Marie mentioned the electric car charging stations. That's sort of a 21st century kind of move designed to put the ability to make sure that people are buying more energy efficient vehicles and make it easier for them to charge them. All sorts of things that sort of touch on every aspect of the American economy and American society. Separate from that, at some point next month, we think by mid-April, he's going to be talking about some human infrastructure ideas. Things like expanding universal pre-kindergarten, not just to big cities like New York or the limited services here in Washington, but to every single community across the country so that younger children can start their education sooner. Free community college potentially for lower-income Americans, eligible lower-income Americans. Child care assistance for working families that meet a certain income threshold. And some other changes in health care and care for older Americans. Those things are sort of in this, again, human infrastructure bucket, but they're also the kinds of things that Democrats may just be pushing for and have for years. If you were looking at the physical infrastructure plan, the one that's up there on the screen, versus these other ideas, it's probably more likely that this one, the one he's announcing today, has legs, has the potential to find bipartisan support and ultimately get passed. Let's see about that other one. Certainly the White House will push for it. There are a lot of more aspirational things in that collection of proposals that may or may not make it. Remember when he added the minimum wage to his rescue plan, and then they had to take it out, and everyone kind of went, well, okay, we tried? I get a sense that that second bucket, they'll deny that here, but that second bucket of proposals, if they had to cut and run, might be the kind that they leave by the wayside in order to get this first one done. Because there's a real desire to make sure that the two parties find a way to work together, and it's more likely, even though it's still very unlikely, that this one would get Republican support because it's focused on a lot of big construction projects and public renewal projects that have been sitting there for a while waiting to get addressed. The president trying to take it on now and say, look, if you've got ideas on how to pay for it, Republicans, bring them forward. I'll take a look at them.
And does this infrastructure bill also take aim at China?
Take on what?
Does it also sort of take aim at China? Is it also attempting to counter China?
Yes. I mean, and that is sort of a message that this administration is using when it comes to anything it's introducing regarding the economy. That at a moment when China's on the rise, both economically and militarily, we've got to be doing what we can in this country, they argue, to counter that rise. And so you've got to put more money into the economy, create more public investment. And look, they look at surveys that say that right now, coming out of the pandemic, there's public support for more government intervention or for more government spending to help boost the economy. We'll see if that lasts, especially once we start talking about tax hikes. But by making that counter-China argument, they believe there may also be some way to build public support, certainly among Republicans or among independents who may be skeptical about what the president's trying to do here.
And Ed, real quick before we let you go, a little bit of a battle internally with the Dems regarding the price tag. I mean, I know it's expensive and it means increased taxes, but are some members of Congress going to play ball? We know, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is saying it might not be enough.
Yeah, there's an ideological feud here about did this proposal propose enough? Or is it too modest? And what you're going to have there is a conversation among liberals like AOC and others who say we should be spending trillions more to address, for example, the climate change concerns in this country, retrofitting bridges and waterfronts and homes to get ready for more aggressive natural disasters, versus moderates and more fiscal conservatives in the Democratic Party, yes, they exist, who say, well, we can't necessarily be doing this. We've just passed something that was nearly $1 trillion in December, just passed a $1.9 trillion plan in March. You really want to spend another $4 trillion, and is that necessary? Couldn't it cause inflation? Couldn't it over-torque the economy and lead to a recession? That's a debate that will continue. But ultimately, what you're probably going to see, because if the popularity for this sustains itself, is more of a Democratic versus Republican debate and fight over whether or not to pass this and how exactly to pay for it.
All right. Ed O'Keefe for us at the White House. Ed, my friend, thank you.
Take care, guys.